Rival factions in Burundi will hold peace talks today, and the talks at the presidential palace in Entebbe in Uganda follow months of violence. It began in April when President Pierre Nkurunziza announced his intention to run for a controversial third term, which he went on to win in July. The African Union said last week that it would send a 5,000-strong force to stop the violence, which has sparked fears that Burundi is sliding back towards civil war. The AU says it will send in troops despite Burundi's fierce opposition. But for the latest on Burundi, we're now joined on the line by SABC News foreign editor, that's Sophie Mokoena. Sophie, thank you so much for your time and welcome to Newsroom. What is the atmosphere like at the moment?
Well, I spoke to the foreign correspondent who we deployed to go and monitor the talks, but unfortunately he can't speak because the phones were taken away from journalists. And he told me that the representatives from Burundian government are present at the talks. The opposition parties are there. EAC, East African Community representatives are also there, and the AU. Of course, the United States is also represented by its ambassador, and then Belgium also is represented. The civil society from Burundi are also attending the talks. The talks are taking place at Entebbe, that is the state house near the airport in Uganda. It is expected that President Museveni will chair the meeting.
And of course, with all the representation you've mentioned at the peace talks, have the talks started already? And what has been discussed so far, if that's the case?
Well, as you are aware that Uganda is 1 hour ahead of us. The talks started around 8 o'clock South African time, but that was 9 o'clock Ugandan time. And I was told that everybody was present, and it looks like everybody is taking the talk seriously, and they are hoping that come end of the day, they would have found a solution in terms of the way forward on the talks. You would recall that this is the relaunch of the talks. In other words, they must come with the program, they must come with the agenda for the real talks that are expected to take place in Arusha in January, where heads of state from EAC and the Burundian government high leadership will attend, including the opposition parties. In those talks, we are expecting also that the representatives from the Great Lakes region will attend talks, so that come end of the talks in January in Arusha, there is a clear way forward in terms of ensuring that there's peace and stability in Burundi.
Now, Sophie, we do know that the AU had intentions, of course, of sending 5,000 troops, in Burundi, of course, to assist with the violence there, so peace may take place. And we know that also Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma has called on Burundi to also start peace talks and to also find common ground with your opposition. Out of today's peace talks, what are the leaders expecting to get out of the engagement?
The issue of sending the troops will be discussed, but I am sure that a decision will not be taken today, because today you have people at the lower level, technocrats, with the intention to prepare for the real talks in Arusha, which are expected to take place in January. Only in January, in Arusha, a decision in terms of deploying standby force will then be taken. You heard that President Nkurunziza doesn't want the standby force to go to his country. He is arguing that he's got enough force to ensure that he can bring stability in his country. He even argued that his soldiers, some of them are deployed in countries such as Somalia, where there is instability. Therefore, you can't come and say he can't protect his own people. But they are also arguing that the tension and these killings are happening in isolated areas in Bujumbura only, but the large part of the country, there are no violence. But AU feels strong that there should be a deployment of the peace force, so that you ensure that you don't see the incidents similar to what we saw in Rwanda and in Burundi some few years ago, where many people died because the world didn't stand up and do something when violence started. Therefore, I expect the leaders in January in Arusha in Tanzania to come up with a decision whether to deploy standby force or not to deploy the standby force. But U.S. has argued that there must be a deployment of standby force. The United Nations also, the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has argued that there must be a standby force. So now it's up to the East African community leaders, the Great Lakes region leaders, the AU, to ensure that they pressurize Bujumbura to accept the force in Burundi.
And with that pressure, I mean, we do understand that the African Union is also said to send more peacekeepers to the region, with, the world calling on the deployment of the troops to Burundi, as you mentioned, the US as well as the UN. However, reports also came out saying that President Pierre Nkurunziza regards this as more of an invasion force.
You would recall that when you talk about this force, you expect the countries around Burundi or in the Great Lakes region or East African community countries to contribute to the force. But you know very well there's hostility between Burundi and Rwanda. Therefore, Nkurunziza feels that having forces from around Burundi and the neighboring countries, some of them he doesn't have good relations with, will be an invasion. But we've heard President Paul Kagame of Rwanda saying he will not send his troops in Burundi. I think he's avoiding the same accusations that Burundi is behind the whole instability. You would recall that even the United Nations has recommended that an investigation must be done because there are reports that there is a third external force. Therefore, who is this external force? And all the time, Burundi points a finger at Rwanda. Therefore, it is going to be very difficult to agree in terms of who will be deployed there and which countries will contribute the force. But remember, we recently saw the African Union launching a standby force in South Africa. Maybe this will be the first deployment, as they indicated then when the force was launched in the Northern Cape in Lohata, that by December the force will be ready. By January, the force will be ready for deployment. Maybe those countries who have already contributed to that AU standby force are the very same countries that will avail the troops, so that there is a deployment somewhere towards end of January. And you also recall that the African Union summit, the annual summit, will take place in Addis Ababa from the 25th of January to the 31st of January.
All right, since we've lost our SABC News foreign editor there, Sophie Mokoena, giving us an update on Burundi as it stands. As you understand, of course, they will have and hold their peace talks today in Entebbe in Uganda, where Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni is expected to mediate. And past, of course, reports, we have reported that the AU had wanted, or rather considered and written to Burundi to send 5,000 peacekeepers, of course, in the country. However, President Pierre Nkurunziza had regarded that as an invasion force and rejected that claim. More, of course, from global calls. The US, the UN had called, of course, for the deployment to go into the country through force, but we'll keep, of course, monitoring those talks and